There is a machine sitting in the dark on another planet, and it has stopped answering. It has not moved in longer than a year. Its solar panels, once bright and clean, are buried under a fine red dust that no wind on that world seems willing to lift away. Somewhere above it, a sky that used to be pale butterscotch has gone the color of rust and ash. And every so often, on a schedule written by engineers 140 million miles away, a radio dish on Earth turns quietly toward that spot on the horizon and listens. It has been listening for a long time. Nothing comes back. This is Objects in the Dark, and if you are new here, this is a channel about the true stories of things out there, machines, stars, and the honest mysteries in between. Consider sticking around, because what happened to this particular machine is not really a story about a robot breaking down. It is a story about how long something can keep working after everyone stops expecting it to, and about the very last thing the people who built it chose to say to it, on the day they finally let it go. That part changed the way I think about goodbyes. Stay for it. Its name was Opportunity, and it was never supposed to still be out there at all. In the summer of 2003, a small team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory finished building two identical rovers, each about the size of a golf cart, each with 6 wheels, a tall mast carrying a stereo camera for a head, and a robotic arm folded beneath its body like a tucked wing. They called them Spirit and Opportunity. The mission plan for both was almost comically modest: land safely, survive the Martian cold, and study the surface for 90 Martian days. 90 days. That was the number written into the budget, the number the engineers were told not to get attached to. Spirit landed first, in a wide crater called Gusev, on a January night in 2004. 3 weeks later, its twin came down on the opposite side of the planet, in a flat expanse named Meridiani Planum, and rolled to a stop inside a small crater it had made itself by bouncing across the ground wrapped in airbags. The team back on Earth had not expected to land inside a crater. It turned out to be the luckiest accident in the mission's history, because the crater wall was lined with pale, layered rock that no one had planned to find so soon. Within days, Opportunity's cameras spotted something strange scattered across the reddish soil around it. Small, dark, spherical grains, like tiny blueberries pressed into the dust. The science team back home studied them for weeks. They were concretions of an iron mineral called hematite, and on Earth, that particular mineral almost always forms in the presence of liquid water. It was one of the first strong pieces of physical evidence that Mars, this cold, dry, apparently dead world, once had water moving across its surface. Not a maybe, not a model, a rock you could point a camera at. That should have been the highlight of a 90-day mission. Instead, it was the first paragraph of a 15-year one. There was a piece of luck built into the mission that nobody had planned for, and without it, none of what came next would have happened. Mars has wind, thin as its atmosphere is, and every so often that wind gathers itself into a spinning column of dust called a dust devil, wandering across the plains like a small, harmless tornado. Engineers had assumed these would slowly bury the rover's solar panels over time, coating them in grit until there was no longer enough sunlight getting through to keep the batteries charged. Instead, again and again, a passing dust devil would sweep directly across Opportunity's panels and simply wipe them clean, like a hand brushing dust off a table. Nobody commanded it. Nobody could have planned it. It just kept happening, one lucky gust at a time, and every time it did, the rover's power numbers would jump back up, and it would keep going a little longer than the mission's own engineers thought it should. Opportunity kept driving, and driving. Engineers had designed it to travel perhaps half a mile in its entire operational life, limited by battery power and the wear on 6 delicate wheels never meant to touch another planet. Instead, it crossed craters. It climbed slopes. It descended into a deep bowl called Endurance Crater and drove back out again, something the original mission planners had assumed was far too risky to attempt. It rolled past the wreckage of its own heat shield, still glowing metal against the dust, a strange piece of still life on an empty world. Season after season, it kept going, until the tally of ground it had covered stopped being measured in yards and started being measured in miles. By the time it reached the rim of a much larger crater named Endeavour, years into a mission that was supposed to have ended before its first Martian winter, Opportunity had traveled more than 28 miles across the surface of another planet. That is farther than any wheeled vehicle, human-built or otherwise, has ever moved anywhere but Earth. It is roughly the distance of a marathon, run one careful, dust-covered inch at a time, by a machine that was never expected to finish its first mile. The team back on Earth noticed the milestone as it happened, and quietly named the stretch of ground where the odometer crossed that mark Marathon Valley, a small, private joke between a group of engineers and a machine that could not read its own street signs. Its twin was not so lucky. Spirit, working on the other side of the planet, drove into a patch of soft, hidden sand in 2009 and could not pull free. For months, engineers tried every combination of wheel movements they could think of to rock it loose, the way you might try to free a car stuck in snow, but the ground simply would not hold. Eventually, the team accepted that Spirit would never drive again and reclassified it as a stationary science platform instead, still useful, still capable of studying the ground directly beneath it. But a rover that cannot move cannot always turn its solar panels to face the winter sun, and as a harsh Martian winter closed in, Spirit's power slowly ran out. It sent its last message home in March of 2010. Opportunity had already lost its twin once before the sky ever turned against it, too. Back on Earth, people who had never thought much about Mars started checking in on it the way you check in on someone you have grown fond of. News anchors gave it updates like a recurring character. Schoolchildren wrote it letters it would never read. Somewhere along the way, without anyone quite deciding it should happen, this 90-day experiment became something closer to a companion. A machine, alone on a cold red plain, doing careful, patient work that people on a much bluer planet had come to genuinely care about. And then in the early summer of 2018, the sky began to change. It started small, the way these things always do. A dust storm, the kind Mars produces fairly often, rose over a region called Perseverance Valley, not far from where Opportunity was working along the rim of Endeavour Crater. At first it looked routine. Mission planners had watched dozens of local storms come and go over the years, and Opportunity had weathered every one of them. But this storm did not stay local. Fed by Mars's thin, dry atmosphere and enormous temperature differences between its cold nights and hot days, it kept growing, spreading outward across hundreds, then thousands of miles, lifting fine dust so high into the atmosphere that within days it had wrapped the entire planet in a haze thicker than anything recorded in the mission's history. Sunlight is the only thing that keeps a solar-powered rover alive. Opportunity had no battery large enough to run on stored power for long. It needed fresh sunlight almost every single day just to keep its internal heaters running through the brutal cold of a Martian night, let alone to talk to Earth. As the storm thickened overhead, the amount of light reaching its panels began to fall. Engineers watched the numbers drop the way you might watch a fuel gauge sink on a long drive with no gas station in sight. 50% of normal light, then far less. The sky above the rover, they would say afterward, had effectively turned to night in the middle of the day. By early June, the storm was no longer a regional weather event. It had grown into what planetary scientists call a global dust storm, one of only a handful ever recorded since spacecraft began watching Mars closely, thick enough to hide the planet's own surface features from telescopes on Earth. At Meridiani Planum, the effect was not wind or noise, because Mars's thin air carries almost no sound worth mentioning. It was simply darkness, arriving in the middle of the day and refusing to leave. The rover's own instruments, built to measure how much sunlight reached the ground, recorded the sky growing dimmer and dimmer, day after day, until the readings looked less like weather and more like an eclipse that never ended. On June 10, 2018, Opportunity sent a final signal confirming its power levels were critically low, and then it did what it was designed to do in an emergency. It shut down everything except its mission clock and went silent to conserve what little energy it had left. For a while, nobody outside the team was worried. Opportunity had survived storms before. The plan was simple: wait for the dust to settle, wait for sunlight to return to the solar panels, and listen for a wake-up call. Engineers at JPL began sending what they called sweep and beep commands, simple radio messages asking the rover to respond if it could hear them, sent out on a rotating schedule, morning and evening, week after week. The storm did clear eventually, months later than anyone wanted. Sunlight returned to Meridiani Planum, and the listening continued and continued. Through the fall of 2018 and into the winter, engineers sent more than 1,000 commands into the dark, trying every version of the question they could think to ask. Are your batteries charged? Is your clock still accurate? Can you hear us at all? There is a particular kind of dread in mission control that does not look like panic. It looks like a room full of very patient people, running the same calm procedure over and over, past the point where hope and duty become difficult to tell apart. By January of 2019, the team had a decision in front of them that no one wanted to make. There was a real possibility that dust settling on the solar panels during the long, silent months had simply blocked too much light for Opportunity ever to wake up again, storm or no storm. There was another possibility, almost crueler, that the rover's internal clock had drifted out of sync during its long sleep, so that it was waking briefly each day and listening at exactly the wrong hour, missing every single call by minutes, forever just barely out of reach of a voice that was still, in fact, calling for it. On February 12, 2019, the team sent one last, carefully chosen set of commands, timed for the hours they judged gave the best possible chance of a response. Nothing came back. The next day, NASA held a press briefing to formally close the mission. A quote spread quickly afterward, credited in the retelling to Opportunity's last data. "My battery is low and it's getting dark." It is worth being honest about that line, because honesty is the whole point of a channel like this one. Those were never words the rover actually sent. They were a journalist's poetic translation of a mission manager describing, in a briefing, roughly what the rover's last readings had implied. Opportunity never had the capacity to say anything like that, and it does not need borrowed poetry. What it actually did was simpler and, if you sit with it, somehow just as affecting. It kept transmitting engineering data for as long as it physically could, reporting its own condition faithfully, right up until there was no longer enough power to keep talking. It did not narrate its own ending. It just kept doing its job until the moment it couldn't. In the room at JPL where the final commands were sent, several members of the team gathered together. Someone had chosen a song to play afterward quietly over the control room speakers, as a way of saying goodbye to a machine that had outlived every deadline anyone had ever set for it. An old recording of "I'll Be Seeing You," a wartime song about being apart from someone and still carrying them with you, wherever you happen to be. It is a strange, small, deeply human detail, a control room full of engineers, choosing a love song for a robot, and it tells you more about how this mission ended than any spec sheet could. Here is the number worth sitting with. Opportunity was built, tested, and budgeted for a 90-day mission. It operated for just over 15 years. That is nearly 60 times longer than the job it was designed to do, on a planet with no repair crews, no spare parts, and dust storms that can swallow a hemisphere. It did not fail because a wheel finally broke or a circuit finally gave out from age. In the end, it was simply the sky that beat it. And even that took the worst storm in a generation to manage. There is a strange kind of comfort in how the mission ended once you sit with the details long enough. This was not a machine that vanished or exploded or was lost in some unknown accident nobody could explain. Every reading it ever sent home was recorded, checked, and understood. Engineers know almost exactly what happened to it, hour by hour, right up until the last transmission. Opportunity did not disappear into mystery. It simply ran out of sky. It is still there right now, on the rim of a crater on a planet you can sometimes see as a reddish point of light in your own night sky. Its wheels are still pointed in the direction it was driving the day the storm rolled in. Its cameras are still aimed at the same patch of Martian ground they were studying that morning, waiting for a command that is never going to come. Nothing on Mars will move it, or rust it the way rain would on Earth, or grow over it. Barring a future mission that goes out of its way to visit, it will likely sit exactly where it stopped, gathering a little more dust every year, for longer than human civilization has existed. Long after everyone who built it, worried about it, and finally said goodbye to it is gone, Opportunity will probably still be sitting quietly on that crater rim, facing the work it never got to finish. Other machines are still working on Mars today, newer ones, built with the lessons Opportunity's team learned the hard way. None of them have matched its distance yet. None of them have had to. Most people go through their whole lives without ever thinking about the fact that there is a small, dust-covered machine on another planet, parked mid-task, that outlasted its own deadline by 60 times over before a planet-sized storm finally caught up with it. You know now. And the next time you notice Mars in the sky, that faint reddish point above the horizon, you will know that somewhere on its surface, a rover built for 90 days is still sitting exactly where it stopped working, having already done everything anyone ever asked of it, and then 15 years more. If you had been in that room at JPL, and you had to choose just one more command to send before letting go, what would you have asked it to do? I read every comment. I will see you in the next one.